Claire was shelving old paperbacks when a faded envelope fluttered to her feet, landing softly like a whisper from the past. Kneeling down, her heart skipped as she recognized her own handwriting. Fragile ink now blurred with time, its tenderness long forgotten. Carefully she opened it, fingertips trembling as the words surfaced, clear and aching. "I've never felt lonelier than when you're beside me, but never truly seeing me." She paused, breath tight in her chest, transported to countless quiet evenings, where silences grew louder than words, where presence became absence and closeness magnified the distance. It was a loneliness she'd buried beneath smiles, coffee, and quiet routines, yet here it was, stark and undeniable, stirring within her, the realization she'd avoided for years. And softly, almost unconsciously, she wondered, have you ever felt lonelier beside someone than by yourself? Knowing instinctively she wasn't alone in feeling this way. Claire Evans lived quietly in the gentle stillness of Maplewood, a place hidden among Vermont's rolling hills, where seasons slipped softly into one another, leaving behind whispers rather than sharp changes. Each morning, Claire brewed coffee in an old porcelain mug, chipped gently at the edge, a relic from a life she had long outgrown, yet never fully let go. She'd sit by the window, her fingers brushing absent-mindedly over worn pages of novels she'd read too many times, finding comfort in their familiarity. From the outside, her life seemed serenely complete. A charming cottage, a beloved little bookstore named Whispering Pages, and the warmth of a tight-knit community. But within those walls, Claire moved softly through her days, wrapped, not only in knitted shawls but in a quiet longing she'd never dared voice aloud, afraid of the echoes it might return. Loneliness had become her silent companion, carefully masked behind the pleasant exchanges at the bakery, the gentle laughter shared with customers, and the habitual kindness she offered others without reserve. Yet, behind closed doors, especially, as evening shadows lengthened, her mask slipped, revealing the stark solitude that awaited her each night. Claire had long stopped believing in the promises whispered by old love songs drifting from her antique radio, though she still played them every afternoon, letting their nostalgic melodies fill the silent spaces. Her marriage had ended quietly years ago, not dramatically, not loudly, but slowly fading into a distance that neither she nor her husband had the courage to acknowledge, until nothing remained but polite silences and unspoken goodbyes. Her daughter, Emma, now studying miles away, had left behind an emptiness that Claire struggled to fill, often wondering if her child, too, recognized the quiet sadness hidden beneath her mother's calm exterior. Claire often wondered whether others in her small, quiet town shared this silent ache, the sensation of standing among loved ones yet feeling utterly unseen, yearning deeply for someone to truly know them again. On rare, honest nights, she admitted to herself this truth. She'd learned to live with loneliness not because she wanted to, but because she'd forgotten how else to live. And now, gently and sincerely, she asked herself, and anyone who might, be quietly listening. Have you ever smiled through loneliness, hoping someone might notice the truth beneath your eyes? The afternoon Claire received the faded cardboard box from her mother was deceptively ordinary, bathed in warm autumn sunlight that slipped gently through her bookstore's windows. She had just finished sorting through a fresh delivery of poetry, anthologies, when the little brass bell above her shop door jingled softly, announcing the courier's arrival. Handing over the box with a polite smile, the young delivery man waved goodbye, leaving Claire alone with the unexpected parcel sitting quietly on the counter, wrapped loosely in brown paper, marked only by her mother's familiar handwriting, a ice. Single word, gentle yet cryptic. Memories. She carried the box carefully to the back room, her heart quickening as she began to peel away the layers of tape, wondering vaguely what pieces of her past her mother had chosen to send this time. Lifting the lid cautiously, Claire caught a faint scent of lavender, instantly transporting her back to the safety of her childhood home. a house filled with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and shelves overflowing with books that whispered comfort to her during lonely afternoons. Nestled inside were stacks of old photographs, vintage postcards, and finally, bound neatly with a ribbon of faded blue silk, a small bundle of letters she had never before seen. Her breath caught, and an unfamiliar chill settled into her chest as she gently tugged at the ribbon, unfolding the first envelope to see her own name written with unmistakable intimacy, but in handwriting that immediately sent a shiver of recognition down her spine. It belonged to someone she'd forced herself to forget, though clearly her heart had failed to follow that instruction completely. With fingers shaking slightly, Claire slid the delicate pages from their long-held hiding place, and there, etched in faded ink, words unfolded, revealing truths she had never known existed. The date, stamped faintly at the top, marked nearly a decade prior. A chapter of her life she believed was closed, sealed with silence rather than clarity. She lowered herself onto the small wooden stool tucked between shelves, her pulse quickening. As each word opened hidden wounds she hadn't realized remained unhealed. "I never knew loneliness could be something shared," he had written, each letter meticulous yet hesitant, as if the words themselves feared revealing too much. "Each time I sat beside you, I saw the same loneliness reflected in your eyes that I felt deeply within myself, and I wondered if you saw mine as clearly as I saw yours." Claire's throat tightened painfully as the revelation settled into her soul. How had she not seen it before? She had spent years quietly nursing her own sadness, believing herself utterly alone in the burden, never considering that the person beside her might have been equally trapped in their own invisible cage. A soft sound escaped her lips, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, as memories rushed back like an overwhelming tide. The quiet dinners, where conversation faltered, the walks by the lake filled more with silence than words. The moments she had instinctively looked away from his gaze, afraid to discover disinterest or indifference there. Now, she realized with a profound clarity that those silences hadn't been signs of his emotional absence, but perhaps evidence of his own uncertainty, his own loneliness mirroring hers, hidden beneath layers of polite pretense and restrained affection. She glanced upward, suddenly aware of the waning daylight casting gentle shadows across the room. Clutching the letter closer, she realized her mother had sent her more than just memories. She'd delivered truth and perhaps a chance for healing. Claire stayed in the bookstore long after closing hours, immersed in each letter as the autumn evening crept quietly through the streets outside. She read slowly, carefully, absorbing each line, feeling the emotions, both his and hers, surface with striking intensity. Every paragraph, every hesitant admission reopened a long-buried longing, along with the ache of missed opportunities. Yet beneath the sadness lay something fragile and precious, a spark of understanding, a quiet possibility she had never allowed herself to consider. Reaching the final letter, Claire's breath hitched, recognizing the urgency in the script, the desperate attempt at honesty he'd finally permitted himself. "I want to believe we're more than two people quietly drowning side by side," he had written, ink smudged slightly as though by tears. "But every time I reach for you, you seem just out of reach. Perhaps you felt the same, reaching for me but never truly touching. Maybe our greatest mistake was not speaking these truths sooner." Tears blurred Claire's vision as she folded the pages gently, resting them against her chest, heart aching with both regret and revelation. How easily they'd accepted loneliness, how quietly they'd allowed distance to grow between them, assuming it was inevitable rather than challenging it with honesty. Claire stood, her legs slightly unsteady beneath her, walking slowly to the front of the store where evening shadows stretched across the polished wood floors, pooling softly at her feet. She stared out at the quiet street, its familiar lampposts glowing gently, illuminating empty sidewalks, and whispered a silent question into the solitude. "If I'd known then, Would things have been different? She knew the answer instinctively, though the question held no bitterness, only gentle wonder at how life might have unfolded had she found the courage to share her truth, and if he'd done the same. Carefully placing the letters back into their box, Claire returned home, the bundle held securely against her heart as if protecting newfound clarity. That night, sleep eluded her, replaced instead by restless contemplation, her thoughts tracing endless circles around the words she'd read, imagining conversations they'd never shared, confessions they'd withheld, and a closeness they'd denied themselves. When dawn finally broke, casting golden hues across her bedroom walls, Claire knew something within her had shifted permanently. These letters were more than simple echoes of a past romance. They were invitations to rediscover herself, to reclaim the honesty she'd forfeited long ago. And though she couldn't rewrite the chapters she'd lived, she understood that from this moment forward, loneliness would no longer be something she quietly endured. Rather, it would be something she openly confronted, choosing truth and vulnerability over silent resignation. She rose slowly, approaching the window to watch as the early sun spilled warmth over the sleeping town, the colors outside matching the cautious hope now filling her heart. And there, as daylight softly painted the world anew, Claire silently promised herself to no longer allow loneliness to define her life. Holding the final letter carefully, she whispered another quiet question, not only for herself but for anyone who might find themselves similarly trapped. Have you ever discovered too late that honesty might have changed everything? For days, Claire carried the weight of those newly discovered letters around like a gentle, persistent ache, their words whispering through her thoughts even as she moved quietly about her routines. Finally, one evening, as twilight draped softly across Maplewood, she allowed herself to revisit the box. Sitting at her worn kitchen table, she slowly unfolded another letter, one dated just weeks before they had finally parted ways, though she hadn't realized then how imminent the ending was. His handwriting, usually neat and precise, showed signs of hesitation, letters trailing off as though his confidence had failed him mid-sentence. Claire's fingers traced softly over the faded ink, her heart beating unevenly as she read, "There's a painful truth I've never found the courage to share with you, Claire. I've always feared what it might do to us, or perhaps more selfishly, what it would do to the quiet comfort we've built." Her breath caught sharply, dread pooling in the pit of her stomach as the gentle words blurred before her eyes. He continued, his honesty now evident in each careful stroke of the pen. "I think we both know, deep down, that comfort and love are not the same thing. I've struggled silently for years, knowing my heart never truly found its home with you, even though you were always kind, always patient, always there." The room around her seemed to sway slightly, as if reality itself had tilted on its axis. Claire drew in a deep, shaky breath, forced herself to continue reading, each word cutting deeper yet strangely bringing a clarity she hadn't known she needed. "I stayed because leaving felt cruel, impossible even. How could I leave when you'd given me no reason? But the truth is, the loneliest moments I've experienced were spent beside you. Not because you failed me, but because I couldn't give myself completely. I withheld parts of myself, not intentionally, but inevitably. Perhaps you felt that distance too, though we never spoke of it." Claire felt a soft cry building in her throat, pressing her palm against her lips to suppress the overwhelming swell of grief and recognition. She remembered clearly the nights she'd lay awake, staring at the ceiling, knowing instinctively that something fundamental was missing, yet unwilling to confront it. She'd blamed herself, never realizing he carried the same quiet burden, the same restless sorrow. The letter continued, painfully gentle, each sentence more honest than the last. "We settled, Claire, settled into a quiet companionship, believing it was enough. But neither of us ever truly asked if it was, did we? I allowed silence to speak for me, foolishly assuming it was kinder than the truth. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, falling softly onto the page, blending with the faded ink. Her world felt both unbearably fragile and strangely relieved, as if a heavy veil had finally lifted, allowing her to see clearly for the first time in years. She'd spent so long clinging to an illusion of contentment, she hadn't allowed herself to imagine anything beyond quiet endurance. In that moment, surrounded by the gentle hush of her kitchen, Claire understood something profound. She hadn't merely lost someone she once loved. She'd spent years loving a version of someone who never existed, a ghost constructed from assumptions and silences. The realization settled deeply, painfully inside her chest. Yet, beneath the pain, there was a strange sense of gratitude for the truth, at last spoken, however belatedly. Slowly, deliberately, Claire folded the letter back into its envelope, fingers trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the small clock ticking softly on the wall. Each quiet tick echoed like the faint heartbeat of something precious that had slipped silently away, unnoticed until now. How could two people stand so close for so long, yet remain so far apart? She rose from the table, crossed slowly to the window, watching as darkness deepened outside, streetlights casting pools of gentle golden light across quiet sidewalks. Somewhere inside, a question stirred, tentative yet compelling. Had she known the truth sooner, would it have set her free or simply wounded her more deeply? The night stretched slowly before her, and Claire found herself unable to seek refuge in sleep. Instead, she drifted quietly through the rooms of her cottage, each step feeling heavier with memories that refused to fade quietly back into their hidden corners. She paused briefly at the mantel, her eyes lingering on framed photographs. A family portrait taken years ago, now faintly dusted by time. Her heart twisted softly as she gazed at his familiar face, seeing it clearly, perhaps, for the first time, not through the haze of habit or comfort, but in sharp relief. The careful smile, the guarded eyes, and the gentle distance she'd always sensed but refused to acknowledge. She recalled countless mornings spent together in quiet solitude, drinking coffee in silence, conversations hanging incomplete between them, words carefully measured to avoid disruption. Claire had always believed they had found peace in those silences, mistaking the absence of conflict for genuine connection. Now she saw clearly what those quiet mornings truly represented. Two souls politely stepping around the truth, both afraid to disrupt the delicate balance they had created. Standing quietly beneath the warm glow of a softly humming lamp, she picked up another photograph, a candid snapshot of herself laughing freely during an autumn afternoon long past. It struck her how unfamiliar that woman seemed, carefree, vibrant, unafraid. Claire traced the edge of her younger self's smile with gentle fingertips, a pang of longing catching her by surprise. Had she truly lost that part of herself in all these years? Or had she merely hidden it away, believing it safer? She placed the photo gently back on the shelf, her gaze now drifting toward the empty spaces around her, keenly aware of how carefully she'd arranged her life to accommodate silence and solitude. Every cushion, every piece of furniture seemed chosen to fill a void rather than express true joy or purpose. Claire knew she'd become skilled at creating illusions, not only for those around her, but also for herself, constructing comfort from denial and quiet resignation. Returning to the table, Claire slowly gathered the letters, stacking them neatly before returning them to their box. As she closed the lid, something shifted within her, subtle yet unmistakable. She realized she could no longer accept silence as a substitute for love or complacency as comfort. The letters had given her a painful gift, awareness. She saw now that love required more than just shared space. It demanded courage, vulnerability, and honesty, qualities she'd abandoned long ago out of fear. She sat quietly for several more minutes, listening to the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant rustling of leaves stirred by a soft night breeze. And there, in that simple stillness, Claire made a quiet promise, not to the man whose truths had changed everything, but to herself. From now on, she would no longer shrink from loneliness. She would face it openly, embrace it, and perhaps in doing so, finally move beyond it. Slowly, deliberately, Claire stood, walked back to her bedroom, and opened a drawer where she kept stationery and envelopes, remnants of an era when people still wrote truths on paper. Selecting a fresh page, she smoothed it carefully before lifting her pen, its weight comforting and familiar in her hand. She paused, gathering her courage, and then began writing the words she'd long held silent, knowing they would likely never reach him, but understanding clearly now that they needed to be spoken nonetheless. "You were right," she wrote gently, honestly. "We both mistook silence for kindness, comfort for love. I understand now that loneliness isn't just the absence of someone beside you, it's the absence of truth between you." Finishing the letter, Claire folded it softly, sealing it inside the envelope without an address. This wasn't for him, it was for herself, a declaration of newfound honesty. She knew this small act wouldn't erase years spent in quiet longing, but it marked the beginning of something vital, a journey back toward herself, toward truth, and perhaps toward a loneliness that could finally heal rather than harm. As dawn approached, pale fingers of light touching gently upon her windowsill, Claire allowed herself a quiet, hopeful breath. She stood slowly, walked toward the door, and stepped outside, feeling the crisp morning air against her face, a gentle promise of renewal. And quietly, sincerely, she asked herself, knowing others might silently share her sentiment, "Have you ever mistaken comfort for love and silence for peace?" Or, in the gentle days that followed, Claire carried her quiet revelation like a softly flickering candle inside her chest, fragile yet illuminating. Each morning, as sunlight filtered gently through her lace curtains, she found herself stepping more thoughtfully into her routines, noticing details she'd previously overlooked. There was a new tenderness in how she arranged books in her shop, a newfound care in the quiet greetings she exchanged with neighbors along Maplewood's winding streets. Her heart felt both heavier and strangely lighter, as if acknowledging her hidden loneliness had freed her in a subtle, bittersweet way. One crisp morning, wrapped warmly in her soft wool cardigan, Claire stepped onto her front porch and saw her elderly neighbor Doris sitting peacefully in her rocking chair, knitting needles gently clicking. Doris glanced up, a soft smile spreading across her wrinkled face, inviting Claire to sit beside her. Claire approached slowly, settling comfortably into the familiar wooden chair. "You're quiet today," Doris observed gently, her eyes sharp behind, her glasses as they moved over Claire's face. Claire hesitated, gathering her thoughts carefully. "I've just been thinking about something I found," she admitted softly. "Old letters, memories, truths I didn't realize I needed to hear." Doris nodded knowingly, fingers moving deftly with her knitting. "The past has a habit of finding us when we least expect it," she murmured, her voice calm and reassuring. "Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we keep hidden, believing silence can protect us. But silence rarely heals, it just buries our pain deeper." Claire watched Doris's calm movements, comforted by their steady rhythm. "Did you ever feel lonely beside someone, Doris? Even someone you loved?" Doris paused thoughtfully, gaze distant. "Oh, yes," she replied softly. "My late husband, Robert, was a good man, but he carried wounds he never shared. At first, I believed our quiet was peace, but eventually I realized it was only quiet avoidance. When he finally opened up, it was late. Too late to heal everything, but just in time to forgive." Loneliness can feel worse beside someone you love because you expect them to see you clearly. When they don't, or can't, it makes the distance feel infinite. Claire's heart tightened, recognizing her own experience reflected in Doris's quiet wisdom. "What did you do afterward?" Doris smiled softly, resuming her knitting. "I forgave him, and I forgave myself. For not seeing sooner. For believing silence was enough. Sometimes forgiveness is the only way forward, even when the truth arrives late." Later that afternoon, Claire walked quietly to the town library, the gentle rustling of leaves beneath her feet soothing her thoughts. She found her friend Helen behind the counter, rearranging stacks of novels, her energy warm and vibrant. Helen greeted her cheerfully, her gaze quickly shifting to concern as she noticed Claire's subdued expression. "Tea break?" Helen asked gently, sensing Claire's need for conversation. Soon, they were tucked into the small reading nook at the back of the library, mugs in hand, warmth seeping through the porcelain into Claire's chilled fingers. "What's on your mind?" Helen asked gently, her eyes full of empathy. Claire hesitated, then opened up slowly about the letters, about her realization of their shared loneliness, and her lingering uncertainty about what came next. Helen listened, intently, absorbing every word, before offering carefully, "Claire, you've spent years trying to avoid pain by ignoring it. Maybe now it's time to let yourself feel it, fully, openly, and see where that takes you. Pain isn't always destructive. Sometimes it's just a bridge, something you cross to reach a new understanding." Claire nodded slowly, her heart absorbing Helen's words. "I've been so scared to confront these feelings," she admitted quietly. "But silence hasn't protected me. It's only kept me stuck." Helen gently squeezed Claire's hand. "The bravest choice isn't always comfortable, but you deserve to live a life defined by truth, not avoidance." Returning home, Claire found herself replaying Helen's words as she moved quietly through her house. Her daughter Emma called unexpectedly later that evening, her voice warm yet hesitant, sensing the tension hidden beneath Claire's usual calm. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked gently. "You sound different." Claire paused, surprised by the sudden lump rising in her throat. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I found some letters, honey. Letters your grandmother sent me. Letters from a past I've been trying to ignore." Emma listened carefully, her quiet understanding evident even across the miles separating them. "What did they say?" she asked gently, her voice cautious but supportive. "They told me truths I should have known sooner. That love isn't just being physically present. It's seeing each other clearly, honestly, even if it hurts," Claire answered, her voice breaking slightly. Emma hesitated briefly before saying softly, "Maybe it's good you found them, Mom. Maybe you've needed this clarity for a long time." Claire felt tears slip softly down her cheeks. "Maybe," she agreed quietly, her voice catching. "I just wish I'd realized sooner how much silence could hurt." The call ended tenderly, with Emma promising to visit soon, leaving Claire alone again, feeling both comforted by her daughter's understanding and overwhelmed by the depth of her realizations. The quiet of the evening stretched gently around her, Claire feeling her past and present mingling uncertainly, leaving her unsure how to proceed. She had spent years carefully building her life around safety and predictability, but now she saw clearly that this safety had cost her deeply, trapping her in unspoken truths and buried emotions. That night, sleep came reluctantly, bringing with it dreams she hadn't experienced in years, dreams of quiet walks along the lake, of gentle touches that felt both comforting and incomplete. Claire woke before dawn, breathing unsteadily as she realized even in sleep she couldn't escape the unresolved threads of her past. Her heart felt both bruised and strangely open, as if each new realization had gently peeled away layers she'd built around herself, leaving her raw and exposed. As the pale morning light stretched softly across her bedroom walls, she sat up slowly, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. Claire knew she stood at the edge of something important, something that could either lead her back into the familiar safety of quiet resignation, or forward into a future where truth might finally become her companion, rather than silence. She pondered Helen's words again, considering the idea that perhaps pain wasn't simply something to endure quietly. It could also become a bridge to something better, something more genuine. Claire rose slowly from bed, padding softly into the kitchen to prepare coffee. She paused briefly, noticing her reflection in the window, a woman caught between shadows of the past and the uncertain promise of tomorrow. She'd always chosen silence, believing it protected her from further heartache. But now she understood that silence itself had become her greatest pain, quietly robbing her of true connection, authentic joy, and genuine healing. Holding her steaming mug, Claire walked quietly onto the porch, breathing in the crisp morning air, feeling both unsettled and hopeful. She wondered silently, honestly, if she was truly ready to cross this bridge, to finally let go of the safety she'd clung to so desperately and step into the unknown, toward a life where she could finally speak her truth without fear. Claire had always avoided the attic, instinctively keeping its door closed as if locking away memories too heavy to carry downstairs. Yet tonight, compelled by a gentle yet insistent impulse, she found herself standing at the foot of the narrow staircase, staring up into the shadowed space she had long neglected. She took a slow breath, feeling strangely hesitant as she ascended each creaking step, guided only by the soft glow of a lantern, her heartbeat echoing gently in the quiet around her. The attic air was cool and slightly musty, mingling with the subtle fragrance of cedar and lavender, a nostalgic blend that instantly transported Claire back to a younger version of herself. Around her, draped furniture stood like patient ghosts, waiting silently beneath worn white sheets, guarding fragments of her past that she'd chosen to forget. Her eyes moved softly across cardboard boxes labeled carefully in her own handwriting, until finally settling on a familiar wooden chest tucked beneath a sloping beam. Claire approached the chest slowly, feeling a faint tremor pass through her as she knelt down to open its lid. The familiar creak seemed louder now, as though protesting the interruption of its long slumber. Her breath caught slightly as she carefully lifted layers of fabric aside, fingers brushing tenderly against forgotten scarves, until finally uncovering a small leather-bound notebook. Her heart tightened gently. It was her old diary, once cherished but ultimately abandoned, its pages holding truths she'd chosen not to revisit. Lifting it into her hands felt profoundly intimate, as though reconnecting with an old friend who knew secrets she'd long kept hidden, even from herself. She settled carefully onto the attic floor, cross-legged beneath the soft glow of lantern light, feeling strangely vulnerable, yet oddly comforted by the gentle solitude around her. Claire traced a fingertip along the diary's worn edges, hesitating briefly before finally opening it, inhaling softly as the pages whispered their quiet invitation. Her eyes gently scanned lines of youthful handwriting, vividly recalling a version of herself who was bold, fearless, and unafraid of confronting loneliness head-on. A stark contrast to the woman she'd quietly become. She realized, in that gentle moment of clarity, that perhaps the truths she'd long been avoiding were precisely the truths she most desperately needed to rediscover. With careful fingers, Claire turned the delicate pages, each line drawing her deeper into memories she had long chosen to forget. The handwriting, her handwriting, captured a younger, braver version of herself who once believed that loneliness was merely temporary, something easily overcome by determination and love. But as Claire's gaze traveled softly down each entry, a quiet ache blossomed in her chest. She could vividly remember the precise moments she'd written these words, The lingering silences at dinner, the gentle distance growing between her and the man she'd loved. Silences she'd initially mistaken for peaceful comfort, rather than signs of an emotional drift. One entry, marked by smudged ink, caught her attention sharply. "He was here tonight," she'd written softly, the ink blurred slightly by tears she no longer remembered shedding. "We sat side by side, yet I felt utterly alone. He looked at me, but his gaze seemed empty, like he was already someplace else. Is this how loneliness takes root?" Quietly, without warning, until suddenly you look up and realize you're entirely alone, even though someone's sitting right beside you? Claire drew a careful breath, the attic's silence suddenly heavy with the echo of her younger self's quiet despair. How had she managed to ignore such profound sadness, allowing herself to drift quietly into a loneliness she had sworn never to accept? She turned another page, fingers trembling slightly as memories surfaced, gentle yet painful. She read of quiet evenings spent sitting together yet worlds apart, of polite conversations that carefully avoided depth, masking truths neither had the courage to speak. One sentence resonated painfully clear. "I fear loneliness has grown. Comfortable. Maybe I've already surrendered. Too tired to fight anymore." Claire's eyes closed briefly, a gentle sigh escaping her lips as regret settled softly over her. She saw clearly now how each day had gradually eroded her resolve, replacing fierce determination with quiet resignation, slowly and silently. She had allowed loneliness to become her normal, trading vibrant truth for muted complacency. As she opened her eyes once more, gently flipping through the remaining pages, Claire understood deeply the quiet price she'd paid, the emotional toll she'd accepted as necessary. But perhaps, she thought gently, turning another fragile page, recognizing loneliness was the first crucial step toward finally overcoming it. Claire sat quietly, lantern glow flickering softly around her as she lingered over each faded sentence, recognizing within them the hidden truths she'd long buried beneath layers of polite silence. Reading these pages now, she felt strangely as if she were meeting herself for the first time. A younger Claire, fiercely determined to face life's loneliness honestly rather than surrender to it. She saw clearly how once she'd been someone who refused quiet compromises, someone who believed true connection was worth risking vulnerability. Yet slowly, silently, she'd lost that courage, trading authenticity for the quiet illusion of comfort. The attic seemed to close gently around her, shadows deepening as Claire leaned back, absorbing the profound realization of how easily and quietly she'd let herself slip away. Her younger self's honesty stirred something deep and tender inside her chest, awakening a fragile yet insistent ache, a longing to reclaim the vibrant truth she had once embodied but gradually abandoned. Turning another page, Claire paused. At an entry she barely remembered writing, its honesty cutting sharply through her now. "I promised myself that I'd never sacrifice my heart simply to avoid being alone. Yet tonight, as I watched him sitting quietly beside me, I realized that's exactly what I've begun to do. I've accepted quietness as peace, distance as closeness, silence as understanding. I'm afraid I've lost more than just my voice. I've lost myself." A gentle sigh escaped her lips, mingling softly with the quiet stillness of the attic. Claire knew deeply, instinctively, that these words, written so honestly, yet forgotten so easily, were precisely the truths she'd needed to rediscover. She had quietly silenced herself over the years, convinced that speaking up would disrupt the fragile balance she'd painstakingly constructed. Now, as she confronted the gentle clarity of these memories, Claire saw that balance for what it was, a comforting yet damaging illusion. Her gaze drifted softly upward, toward the attic beams overhead, the gentle creak of the old house around, her a comforting reminder of reality. Claire recognized now the true cost of her quiet resignation. Loneliness had not only distanced her from others, It had quietly separated her from herself. But perhaps, she thought softly, this gentle ache within her chest wasn't simply loss. Perhaps it was an invitation to begin again, to rediscover the courage she'd mistakenly abandoned along the way. Claire gently closed the diary, resting her palm against its worn cover, feeling a quiet heaviness settle in her chest. Slowly, she allowed herself to lean back against an old trunk, her eyes drifting across the attic's shadowed corners, each filled with echoes of lives unlived and truths left unspoken. She understood now, with a poignant clarity, the profound cost of all those silent years, the quiet sacrifices she'd made, believing they would protect her, when in reality they'd quietly stolen her deepest joys, leaving only emptiness behind. As memories resurfaced gently, Claire saw clearly the evenings she'd let slip by without meaningful conversations. Moments she'd chosen, silence over honesty, believing it safer. She remembered quiet mornings at the breakfast table, carefully avoiding questions that might unsettle their delicate truce, yet secretly yearning for something deeper, more honest. Each instance returned softly now, carrying regret but also a gentle understanding that perhaps she'd done the best she could with what she knew then. She remembered vividly one particular evening, years earlier, when she'd sat beside him in quiet silence, feeling utterly invisible, yet desperately hoping he'd somehow sense her loneliness, read it clearly in the quietness around her. But he'd merely turned away, choosing quiet acceptance over confrontation, and she'd quietly let him, mistaking silence for kindness. Claire saw now the heartbreaking truth. Silence hadn't spared either of them pain. It had simply prolonged, it quietly robbing them both of genuine connection. Her breath trembled gently, tears gathering softly in her eyes as she confronted another memory. An anniversary dinner spent quietly in mutual detachment, candles flickering gently between them, unable to bridge the emotional chasm their silence had created. Claire recalled vividly how desperately she'd wanted to speak, to say something real, to break through the invisible barrier they'd silently built. Yet she'd chosen silence instead, believing it easier, safer. Unaware that each quiet moment she accepted distanced her further from herself. Now, sitting quietly amidst shadows, Claire felt deeply the weight of those lost opportunities, realizing how many precious moments she'd traded away in exchange for quiet complacency. Her heart ached softly for the woman she'd become, someone who'd mistaken silence for peace and isolation for comfort. But within this quiet sorrow lingered a gentle resolve, a newfound determination to reclaim what she'd quietly given away. To live authentically, courageously, even if doing so meant confronting loneliness head-on, rather than quietly submitting to its invisible grip. In that gentle darkness of the attic, Claire felt something quietly shift within her, a subtle yet undeniable turning of her heart toward the courage she'd once believed irretrievably lost. Carefully, she rose from the dusty floor, still clutching the diary to her chest, and slowly moved toward the narrow attic window. Rain tapped softly against the glass, each gentle drop tracing delicate paths downward, mirroring her own quiet release of long-held burdens. She stood silently, watching the droplets blend together, merging effortlessly and then slipping away, a delicate reminder that healing could begin once she chose to let go. Claire knew deeply now, more clearly than ever, that loneliness was no longer something she could quietly endure. It demanded honesty, courage, a willingness to step forward even when safety lay in silence. She understood at last that true peace could only grow from genuine connection, from sharing vulnerabilities rather than hiding them away. With gentle resolve, Claire turned away from the window, descending slowly from the attic, diary still nestled protectively in her arms. She moved softly through her home, each step feeling lighter, as though she'd finally begun shedding layers of quiet sadness she'd unknowingly carried for years. Placing the diary tenderly upon her kitchen table, Claire paused, her fingers gently tracing the journal's edges. She knew she could not rewrite the quiet years she'd lost, but perhaps she could now choose differently. Choose truth over silence, vulnerability over hidden suffering. Quietly, Claire stepped outside onto her porch, breathing in deeply the cool night air, letting it fill her lungs, steadying her resolve. She lifted her face to the gentle rain, feeling each cool drop like a quiet baptism, washing away years of quiet resignation. She knew this was only the first step, a small yet profound choice toward reclaiming herself. But she also understood deeply that sometimes the quietest changes were the most powerful. Gazing gently into the darkness, Claire whispered softly, her voice carrying a quiet yet unmistakable strength, "I won't surrender to loneliness again. Not quietly, not ever." And as she stood beneath the gentle rain, Claire silently wondered, knowing others might quietly ask themselves the same, have you ever let silence become louder than truth, and loneliness feel safer than courage? In the quiet aftermath of confronting her past, Claire felt as if her life had become an open wound, exposed, tender, and painfully aware of every missed opportunity. Each morning was now a struggle, the silent hours of dawn highlighting all she'd quietly surrendered over the years. The simple act of opening her eyes brought a gentle yet crushing reminder that she'd allowed herself to drift into a life defined not by courage or love, but by a silence that had gradually stolen her voice, her heart, and ultimately, her identity. She moved through her days mechanically, the familiar routines no longer providing comfort, but instead serving as gentle reminders of her prolonged isolation. Her home, once a haven, now whispered softly of emptiness. The photographs lining her mantelpiece seemed to gaze back at her accusingly, asking her softly why she'd allowed herself to fade so completely into the background of her own life. Claire couldn't help but notice how, in every captured memory, her smile seemed carefully restrained, as though she'd always been holding back a piece of herself, unwilling to reveal her true heart. The bookstore, once her sanctuary, now became a quiet reflection of her internal solitude. Each book she had lovingly selected over the years to comfort others in their loneliness now mocked her gently from their shelves, reminding her of how thoroughly she'd neglected her own heart. Customers came and went quietly, their gentle murmurs and soft laughter echoing the joy Claire herself had long forgotten. She watched couples browse hand in hand, friends exchanging animated recommendations, and families gathering around the children's section, and felt a soft pang of regret for never daring to reach beyond her carefully constructed barriers. One quiet afternoon, Claire found herself standing before the large shop window, watching the street outside drift softly into twilight. The town was peaceful, bathed in warm, fading sunlight, but her heart ached gently as she recognized how detached she had become from everything around her. She'd spent years nurturing a quiet distance from others, believing it protective, only to discover it had silently grown into an unbridgeable gulf. She remembered Emma's last visit vividly now, how she'd listened carefully, smiling gently and offering encouragement, but always maintaining a careful, invisible wall around her true feelings. Emma had spoken passionately about her future, her dreams filled with adventure, love, and meaningful connections. Claire had nodded softly, silently envying her daughter's bravery, unaware until now how profoundly her own quiet resignation had limited her life's possibilities. How had she spent so many years quietly encouraging others to embrace life fully, while quietly accepting less for herself? That evening, the quiet in her home became unbearable. Claire wandered slowly from room to room, her fingertips tracing the edges of familiar furniture, feeling each quiet corner filled with memories of moments she'd never fully lived. The gentle ticking of the hallway clock echoed softly around her, each second marking another moment she'd quietly allowed to slip through her fingers unnoticed. Her life, she realized gently, had become a collection of polite silences and carefully restrained emotions, an existence defined by the quiet avoidance of pain, yet ultimately devoid of genuine joy. Driven by a quiet restlessness she couldn't quell, Claire stepped outside into the cool evening air. The path to the lake beckoned gently, its familiar route feeling strangely foreign now. She moved softly through the growing dusk, each step taking her further into the quiet solitude she'd spent years constructing. The lake lay calm beneath a tapestry of emerging stars, its smooth surface reflecting gently her own quiet introspection. Sitting slowly onto the bench, Claire allowed herself to finally confront the quiet, heartbreaking truth she'd avoided for so long. In the quiet beauty of the evening, she saw herself clearly, a woman who'd gradually surrendered her voice, her desires, and her heart, all in exchange for the illusion of safety. She had quietly allowed loneliness to become her default, mistaking the absence of conflict for genuine peace, not realizing until now that this quiet had only deepened her sorrow. A gentle sigh escaped her lips, carrying softly into the tranquil air around her as tears formed quietly, shimmering gently under the starlight. Claire understood, in this tender moment, how many chances she'd quietly missed, how many truths she'd left unspoken, how much love she'd allowed to pass quietly. She remembered vividly an evening long ago, when words of honesty had formed on her lips, desperate to be spoken, yet silenced at the last moment by fear. She'd believed silence safer, kinder. But now, sitting quietly beneath the open sky, Claire felt deeply the gentle devastation of that decision. Each quiet choice she'd made in the name of avoiding pain had quietly eroded her ability to truly live. Yet even in this gentle sorrow, Claire felt a quiet stirring of hope, recognizing perhaps for the first time that acknowledging these truths openly was the essential step toward genuine healing. As night settled deeper over the lake, Claire remained still, feeling a gentle yet overwhelming wave of grief wash softly through her chest, each heartbeat echoing quietly the magnitude of what she'd lost. Her thoughts drifted to moments she'd silently ignored, chances she had allowed to slip quietly through her fingers, all sacrificed at the altar of an imagined safety she now understood was never truly hers to claim. The weight of all those quiet years pressed heavily yet softly upon her, bringing tears she could no longer hold back. She recalled vividly those subtle signs she'd chosen to ignore, tiny moments of quiet unhappiness she'd brushed aside, believing them insignificant, those silences at dinner tables, the gentle yet persistent avoidance of difficult conversations, the polite smiles exchanged to mask deeper truths. Each memory resurfaced now gently but firmly, asking her quietly how she'd managed to overlook the growing loneliness within her own heart for so long. Claire realized, with painful clarity, how she'd quietly accepted her husband's distance, never daring to challenge the silence that had grown comfortably between them. How many evenings had she quietly sat beside him, wishing desperately he would turn and truly see her, speak honestly, reveal himself fully, yet never summoning the courage to break the silence herself? Each quiet compromise she'd made had slowly chipped away at her heart, leaving behind an emptiness she'd mistakenly labeled peace. Even friendships had quietly slipped away, gradually fading beneath her gentle neglect. Invitations she'd softly declined, phone calls left quietly unanswered, excuses she'd whispered politely until the invitations no longer came. Now, in the gentle solitude of this lakeside bench, Claire understood clearly how deeply she'd isolated herself, not by dramatic action, but by quiet withdrawal, subtly distancing herself until connection felt impossible to reclaim. The hardest realization of all was acknowledging that she'd quietly denied herself the love and intimacy she'd deeply desired, convincing herself that settling was wiser, safer. She'd allowed herself to believe quiet companionship was sufficient, that true passion and vulnerability were luxuries she could quietly sacrifice without consequence. But the gentle, undeniable truth was evident now. She'd traded her heart's deepest needs for a quiet, superficial calm, silently draining herself of joy and authentic connection. Claire felt profoundly the gentle loss of herself, her youthful optimism, her adventurous heart, the boldness she'd once carried with quiet confidence. Each quality had been slowly worn away by silent years, by the quiet belief that avoiding pain was preferable to facing it honestly. Now, under the starlit sky, she gently grieved for the woman she'd once imagined becoming, but had quietly abandoned along the way. Yet, even as sorrow deepened, something quietly shifted within Claire, a gentle recognition that perhaps this quiet devastation was not simply loss, but rather a gentle awakening, an invitation to finally confront her deepest fears, reclaim her voice and rediscover herself. Maybe, she considered softly, the quiet ache in her heart was not an ending, but a beginning, a tender promise that she still had time to choose differently, to reclaim the honesty she'd sacrificed in the name of quiet comfort. Claire rose slowly from the bench, her body heavy with gentle exhaustion, but her heart quietly lighter, as if finally shedding the invisible weight she'd carried for years. She walked softly along the lakeside path, each quiet step bringing clarity, resolve, and gentle courage. She understood clearly now that silence was no longer an option. Not if she wanted to truly live, not if she wished to finally move beyond quiet regret toward a future defined by genuine honesty. As she approached her home, softly illuminated by moonlight, Claire paused briefly at her doorway, realizing deeply that tonight marked a quiet yet profound turning point, a commitment to no longer allow fear to guide her choices, to no longer quietly accept less than her heart truly desired. She knew the journey toward reclaiming herself would be neither easy nor quick, but she was quietly determined, ready at last to face loneliness openly, rather than hide from it behind polite silences. Inside, Claire moved softly from room to room, feeling a quiet peace settling gently around her, born not from resignation but from genuine acceptance. Tonight, she'd finally allowed herself to feel fully the gentle sorrow of her quiet past, to acknowledge openly all she'd silently forfeited. And within that sorrow lay a quiet strength, a newfound determination that promised healing. Finally, standing beside her kitchen window, Claire gazed gently into the quiet night, softly promising herself that silence would never again become her refuge, that from now on, she would choose honesty, vulnerability, and courage, even when the path felt uncertain and frightening. She whispered quietly into the stillness, her voice gentle yet unwavering. Have you ever felt that quiet regret of realizing your life could have been different? If only you'd spoken up. If only you'd chosen bravery over silence. And as Claire allowed this quiet truth to settle deeply within her, she knew with gentle certainty that she would no longer let fear shape her heart, nor silence determine her fate. Weeks passed gently, marked quietly by subtle yet meaningful changes in Claire's life. She gradually began dismantling the invisible walls she'd built around herself, stepping carefully yet deliberately toward honesty and connection. Each small step, each gentle conversation felt significant, a quiet testament to her newfound courage. Though progress was slow, Claire sensed deeply that the path she'd chosen was leading her toward something vital, her true self. One crisp afternoon, while tidying the bookstore's storage room, a task she'd long neglected, Claire stumbled softly upon a small forgotten box tucked behind stacks of old books. Her heartbeat quickened gently as she lifted the box into the sunlight, its weight surprisingly heavy in her hands. Carefully, she opened its lid, revealing stacks of old letters tied neatly with faded blue ribbon. Claire recognized instantly the familiar handwriting, the unmistakable script of the man she'd quietly loved yet lost through silence. Her breath caught gently as she realized these letters had never reached her. Their envelopes were marked, "Return," to sender, each carefully addressed to her yet inexplicably never delivered. Confusion gently stirred within her chest, mingling softly with curiosity and apprehension. Why had these letters remained hidden, returned unopened? Why had she never known of their existence until now? With cautious fingers, Claire untied the ribbon, gently lifting the first letter from its envelope. The paper was delicate, the ink slightly faded by time, yet the words clearly legible, reaching out to her softly from the past. As she began reading, Claire's heart tightened softly, realizing these were truths she'd long assumed he'd never dared to express. The letter spoke, quietly of his loneliness, mirroring her own hidden despair. He wrote openly of moments he'd desperately wished to reach out to her, to break the silence that had grown quietly yet profoundly between them. Each sentence resonated gently, revealing vulnerabilities Claire had always longed to hear yet never believed existed. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read his quiet admission. "I've spent so long afraid of losing you, Claire, that I never realized my silence was causing exactly that. I kept quiet, believing it protected us, but it only drove us further apart." Claire's vision blurred softly, tears gathering gently as she realized the quiet truth she'd long misunderstood. She'd always believed his silence meant indifference or rejection, never once considering he might have silently suffered the same loneliness she'd quietly endured. With a tender ache, she unfolded the next letter, discovering another quiet confession written just weeks before they parted ways. "I see your sadness, Claire," he wrote gently, each word a delicate revelation. "I see it every day, but I don't know how to reach you. You seem so distant, and I fear my silence has only deepened the gap between us. I wish I knew how to speak clearly, to tell you honestly how much you mean to me, but words fail me, and I retreat again into silence, hoping somehow you'll understand." Claire's heart felt quietly broken, yet profoundly healed at the same time, realizing they'd silently misunderstood each other for years, each believing their loneliness to be solitary, unshared. She read further, softly discovering letter after letter filled with quiet longing, gentle regrets, and tender apologies for the words neither had ever spoken. One letter, written shortly before their relationship ended, brought Claire's breath to a quiet halt. "Claire," he'd written softly, "I wanted so desperately to tell you that silence wasn't my choice. It was my prison. Each day I hoped you'd say something first, anything to let me know you still felt something too. But we both chose silence, believing it safer, never realizing it was quietly breaking us apart." Claire placed the letters gently beside her, her eyes softly closing as she absorbed the weight of this gentle truth. All these years, she'd quietly blamed him, convinced herself his silence meant absence of love or care, yet now she saw clearly, silence had never been his rejection, it had been his fear. They'd both quietly waited for the other to speak first, each silently hoping for a sign, a word of encouragement that had never come. In the quiet stillness of her bookstore, Claire felt a gentle sorrow wash over her, mingled softly with regret for the misunderstandings that had quietly defined their relationship. Yet beneath that quiet sadness lay something fragile yet powerful, an understanding that their love had been real, quietly hidden behind years of silence, gently preserved now within these fragile letters. Claire remained quietly seated on the floor of the bookstore's storage room, surrounded softly by the gentle whispers of her past. The afternoon sunlight shifted subtly through the window, casting tender patterns across the faded letters. Each carefully penned word now illuminated a quiet, yet profound truth she'd never known existed. She'd been silently loved, even in the moments when she'd felt most profoundly alone. She reached slowly for another letter, her fingertips gentle yet hesitant, uncertain how much more quiet revelation her heart could bear. But within her apprehension was a fragile eagerness, a longing to finally uncover every hidden truth she'd unknowingly overlooked. This letter, dated just days before he'd quietly left, carried the weight of a final confession, carefully crafted, yet ultimately unspoken. "Claire, I wish I had the courage to speak these words aloud rather than hide behind silence. But fear holds me captive, and the thought of losing you entirely is paralyzing. Perhaps I've already lost you by saying nothing at all. I see now, too late, that silence wasn't protection. It was surrender. I silently watched our love fade, believing that quiet acceptance would spare us pain. Instead, it brought greater sorrow. Forgive me, Claire, for never speaking these truths openly." Claire's heart gently tightened, realizing that the quiet blame she'd carried all these years was misplaced. She'd quietly convinced herself he'd never truly cared, never imagining he'd also struggled silently, desperately wishing for courage he couldn't summon. Their relationship had not quietly disintegrated from lack of love, but rather from an abundance of fear, each of them silently hoping the other would break the silence first, neither understanding the gentle courage true love required. She gently folded the letter, carefully placing it back among the others, realizing how profoundly these quiet admissions changed everything she'd believed about their past. The silent loneliness she'd felt for years was suddenly reframed, not as solitary abandonment, but as shared pain, quietly endured by two hearts equally fearful of rejection. Claire understood, with gentle yet piercing clarity, that they'd both silently misread each other's quiet signals, mistaking silence for disinterest rather than fear. Rising slowly, Claire gathered the letters tenderly, carrying them gently into the soft evening light filling the main store. She felt a quiet sense of closure, knowing that while these letters had arrived far too late to change their past, they could gently guide her toward a deeper understanding of herself and the woman she wished to become. She had spent years believing her loneliness to be uniquely hers. Yet now she understood it had been quietly shared, unspoken but deeply felt. That evening, Claire sat quietly by her window, the letters resting gently beside her, their presence softly comforting. She thought deeply about him, the man she'd quietly misunderstood for so long, and felt a tender ache of gratitude for finally receiving his truths, even belatedly. She recognized gently that their relationship, while quietly painful, had also been genuinely meaningful. Love had been present, silently hidden beneath layers of fear and silence, waiting patiently yet unsuccessfully to be discovered. As the night settled quietly around her home, Claire felt a gentle shift within herself, a newfound compassion replacing the quiet bitterness she'd carried unknowingly for so many years. Perhaps it was too late for reconciliation, too late to reclaim what they had silently lost. But it wasn't too late for forgiveness, for both of them. The quiet pain they'd shared could now be gently released, replaced with understanding and acceptance. In the quiet solitude of her living room, Claire reached softly for a blank page, inspired by his gentle bravery to finally speak his truth, even if only through unreceived letters. She began writing carefully, choosing words that had long remained silently trapped inside her heart. "I forgive us both for our silence," she wrote gently, each word carrying quiet conviction. "I forgive myself for not speaking sooner, for not reaching beyond my fear. And I forgive you, for I see now that your silence wasn't absence. It was fear, as deep as my own." She wrote slowly, each gentle sentence bringing quiet relief, releasing years of silent regret onto the page before her. When finished, Claire folded her letter softly, placing it tenderly alongside his. This quiet act, she realized, marked a profound turning point. A gentle promise to herself that silence would no longer define her heart or her life. Claire sat quietly, looking out at the stars gently illuminating the darkness beyond her window, feeling at peace for the first time in years. She understood deeply now that truth, even when quietly painful, held the gentle power to heal. And though she'd carried loneliness quietly within herself for so long, tonight she finally saw a way, Forward, not away from her past, but through it, gently guided by honesty, courage, and forgiveness. Softly, Claire whispered into the quiet room around her, voicing a gentle yet powerful question, hoping it would reach anyone quietly holding their own silent regrets. Have you ever discovered too late that your silence wasn't protection, but the very thing holding you back from love? As the gentle echo of her question settled softly within her, Claire knew with quiet certainty that her journey toward healing had finally begun. Claire awoke gently, sunlight softly filtering through, lace curtains, casting delicate patterns onto her bedroom walls. She lay quietly for a moment, absorbing the peaceful stillness of morning, an unfamiliar yet deeply comforting sensation. Her heart felt calm, unburdened in a way she hadn't known in years. Carefully, she rose from bed, each movement filled with quiet mindfulness, as though she were gently discovering herself anew. She moved through the quiet house, opening windows, allowing fresh, cool air to gently circulate through rooms she'd long neglected. The gentle rustle of leaves outside and the soft, distant hum of waking birds filled her home with a gentle vitality, quietly reassuring her that life, with all its complexity and quiet beauty, continued steadily forward. In her kitchen, Claire brewed coffee, savoring the familiar routine now infused with gentle significance. She remembered how often she'd moved mechanically through these quiet moments, missing the subtle joys contained within them. Now, each action felt deliberate, filled quietly with meaning, a gentle testament to her renewed appreciation of life's simple comforts. Later that morning, Claire walked softly through Maplewood's quiet streets, the gentle warmth of sunlight, on her skin a tender reminder that healing, though subtle, had already begun. She greeted neighbors gently, offering sincere smiles rather than polite masks, feeling a quiet yet genuine connection she'd long missed. Each interaction was brief yet meaningful, quietly reinforcing her determination to live openly, honestly, courageously. As she reached her bookstore, Claire paused gently, allowing herself a quiet moment to appreciate the gentle life she'd carefully built, a life that now held quiet promise rather than hidden sorrow. Inside, she began rearranging shelves thoughtfully, curating books that spoke gently of courage, honesty, and second chances. Her heart gently warmed, knowing her shop could become a haven not only for quiet contemplation, but for genuine connection. Near closing time, Claire heard the gentle jingle of the shop's bell, signaling a visitor. Looking up softly, she saw Emma standing quietly in the doorway, her gentle smile hesitant yet full of warmth. Claire moved swiftly yet gently toward her daughter, pulling her softly into a warm embrace, feeling deeply grateful for this quiet, yet profound bond they'd carefully nurtured through quiet years. Together, they sat quietly by the bookstore's large window, evening sunlight gently enveloping them in golden warmth. Emma spoke gently about her university life, quietly sharing dreams, struggles, and quiet victories. Claire listened carefully, understanding deeply how vital this moment was, no longer quietly observing from behind emotional walls, but openly sharing genuine connection. After a quiet pause, Emma looked thoughtfully at her mother. "Mom, you seem different somehow. Peaceful," she said softly. "Did something happen?" Claire hesitated gently, then decided carefully to share her quiet revelations, the letters she'd found, and the gentle truths they'd revealed. Emma listened intently, her expression quietly shifting from surprise to compassion, gently understanding the quiet complexities her mother had quietly faced alone. "I'm sorry you had to carry all that quietly, Mom," Emma whispered tenderly, reaching gently for Claire's hand. "But maybe it's good you've finally found those letters. Maybe they came just when you needed them most." Claire squeezed her daughter's hand softly, feeling gentle tears of gratitude quietly forming. "I think you're right," she answered softly. I spent years quietly believing I was alone, misunderstanding silence as rejection. But now, I see it was fear, mine as much as his, that kept us quietly apart. Emma nodded gently, thoughtful. Do you regret those years? Claire considered, softly before responding. I regret the quiet choices we made, but I don't regret the love itself. It was real, quietly flawed, and deeply human. I've learned something vital, that silence isn't safety. It can quietly rob us of the most important connections. Emma smiled gently, her eyes quietly proud. Then perhaps this wasn't just loss. Maybe it's quietly given you the courage you always deserved. Later that night, after Emma left, Claire sat quietly at her kitchen table, the letters placed gently before her. She knew deeply that tonight marked a quiet turning point, an ending yet also a beginning. With careful, gentle hands, Claire gathered the letters, placing them softly in a small box. She understood they belonged to her past, but the quiet wisdom they held would accompany her gently forward. Stepping softly outside, Claire carried the box gently to her garden. Beneath the quiet glow of moonlight, she carefully knelt and dug a small hole beneath the ancient oak tree, gently placing the box within the earth. Covering it slowly, she felt deeply at peace, knowing this gentle burial symbolized quiet acceptance, forgiveness, and genuine release. Standing quietly, Claire gazed gently upward, stars scattered softly above her, each a quiet beacon of gentle hope. She understood deeply now that endings weren't always losses. Sometimes they were gentle openings, invitations to quietly embrace a future defined by courage rather than silence, connection rather than isolation. As Claire turned quietly back toward her home, she softly whispered into the gentle night, offering quiet gratitude for the painful yet beautiful truths she'd finally embraced. Have you ever realized that letting go doesn't mean forgetting, but gently accepting what once was, and quietly opening your heart to what can still become? She didn't expect an answer, yet the gentle stillness around her offered quiet reassurance. Claire knew with gentle certainty that her journey wasn't over. It had quietly, beautifully, only just begun. Hey, I'm Mary, bringing you awesome content every daily. Smash that follow and subscribe if you're vibing with me. Let's grow this journey together.